Life in the countryside has always had its challenges, but nothing compared to being forced to live with a residents' association that wanted to control even the wind that blew. At first, I thought they were just curious people, but I soon realized that they were taking photos and whispering among themselves, as if they were planning something. One day, I saw a group of 3 of them writing something down, while pointing at the tomato and lettuce plants. The next, a guy from the HOA stopped by the fence and looked at the vegetables as if he were evaluating a product catalog. But the final blow came in the form of a flyer. I went to get my mail, and, amidst the bills and useless advertisements, I found a colorful flyer advertising the HOA Organic Festival. The event promised fresh, local ingredients straight from the community harvest, and listed a series of dishes that would be prepared with these products. So far, so good. Until my eyes landed on the name of the supplier of the vegetables. My farm. Yes, without even asking me, without even pretending to want to negotiate, they simply announced that my farm would be used for the event, as if I were a charity supermarket obliged to provide food for a ridiculous festival. That was the last straw. I went to the HOA headquarters to find out where they'd got this absurd idea from. There she was, the woman responsible for most of the idiotic decisions in this condominium. With her hair perfectly done and a clipboard in her hands, she was already looking at me with that air of superiority of someone who thinks she's always right. "I saw that you decided that my farm is part of the HOA event," I said, throwing the flyer on her desk. "They just forgot to tell me." She didn't even blink. "Oh, that's great that you saw. We're really excited about it. Everyone loves the idea of a festival with fresh, sustainable ingredients." "You mean everyone loved the idea of getting my vegetables for free?" She gave a smile that probably worked with the little ladies in the neighborhood, but not with me. "Well, it's a community festival, and your farm is in the HOA area. We thought you might like to contribute. It's for the good of the neighborhood." The "we think you'd like to" was the moment my blood boiled. I took a deep breath, trying not to start a war right then and there. "I'm not part of the HOA. I never signed anything. My farm was here before you arrived, and I'm definitely not giving my crop to this event." She tilted her head, as if she were dealing with a child who doesn't understand the rules of the game. "Ah, but we've already disclosed it in the official material. It's going to be complicated to change now." Anger rose like wildfire. They had already announced it. They were already counting on my products, as if I had no choice. I left without saying another word, but I knew one thing. If they were so confident that they could take what was mine without permission, then I was going to make sure that every bite at this festival was an unforgettable experience. Because if they were going to steal my harvest, at least I was going to leave a special little treat mixed in with it. Ghost peppers. I knew that if I confronted this woman and the rest of the HOA directly, they would double their bet. People like that don't back down, don't apologize, don't assume wrongdoing. They simply keep pushing their agenda until the other person gives in through exhaustion. But I wasn't going to get tired. Not this time. So instead of ranting and raving like they probably expected me to, I took a deep breath and decided to act much more efficiently. I spent the next few days tending to my crops as usual, pretending that nothing had happened. I kept to my normal routine, watering, harvesting, and preparing the vegetables, but with one small detail. From that moment on, all the vegetables they were going to steal were going to come with a special seasoning. I went to a farm store and bought a whole batch of ghost peppers, one of the strongest peppers in the world, the kind that makes you feel like you've swallowed molten lava. I took the seedlings and planted them discreetly among my vegetables, making sure they grew healthy and beautiful. And when harvest time came, I did what any good neighbor should do. I mixed a few leaves and pieces of the peppers into my produce. Now, all I had to do was wait. On the eve of the festival, exactly what I had imagined happened. Like sneaky rats, some people from the HOA showed up around midnight, thinking they were being discreet, except that I was already expecting it. I watched from the balcony, holding my coffee and laughing inside as they stuffed bags of lettuce, tomatoes, and herbs into the trunk of a black car. They did everything with the false politeness of someone who wants to pretend they're not stealing, but knows full well that they are. And then they drove off, taking my harvest straight to the festival. The next day, the HOA was ecstatic. The festival was set up in the main square of the condominium, with well-decorated tents, lights strung between the trees, a bad band playing something that was supposed to be ambient music. People walked around holding glasses of cheap wine and plates full of organic delicacies, prepared with the vegetables they had picked from my farm. The woman who coordinated everything was there, beaming. She looked like a peacock parading in the middle of the event, greeting the locals as if she had done something great. And that's when the fun began. The main dishes at the event were fresh salads, lettuce wraps, and soups, seasoned with herbs picked directly from the community's fertile land. They had turned everything they had stolen into a huge feast, distributing it among the residents as if it were a divine gift. And at first, everything seemed perfect, until the first people started to feel the heat. First, it was one of the organizers of the event, a middle-aged man who took a generous bite of a salad, and, in less than 30 seconds, began to turn as red as a bell pepper. He tried to disguise it by wiping his sweaty forehead with a napkin. But then his mouth opened, and he let out a strange noise, a mixture of choking and a muffled scream. Next came an older woman who was eating soup. Suddenly, she dropped her spoon and clutched her throat, her eyes wide as if she had just been attacked by a swarm of invisible bees. In a matter of minutes, chaos ensued. People spitting out food, shaking their mouths as if they had swallowed fire. Babies starting to cry because their parents were freaking out and knocking over glasses on the floor. What was once a sophisticated event turned into a scene worthy of a prank show, with desperate residents rushing to the drinks table to fill their mouths with water, wine, anything that could put out the fire inside them. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The woman who organized everything was there, holding a plate and preparing to take her first bite of a lettuce wrap stuffed with fresh herbs. And when she took a bite, I saw it. I saw the exact moment when her eyes went wide, her breathing faltered, and her brain finally processed that something was wrong. She tried to keep her composure for a second, perhaps thinking she could ignore the explosive taste that was taking over her mouth. But then sweat broke out on her forehead, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to try and make an excuse, but all that came out was a desperate sound, followed by an uncontrolled cough. It was beautiful. The surrounding residents began to notice. They saw the HOA leader trembling, her hands on her face, her eyes watering. They tried to ask if everything was all right, but she couldn't answer. And then came the total collapse. She knocked over her plate, took a glass of wine from someone without even asking permission, and poured it all down her throat. But it didn't help, because the alcohol only spread the sting of the pepper even more. It was then that she realized that this was no mere incident. This was sabotage. I, from my corner, watched everything with a discreet smile, enjoying the spectacle that I myself had prepared. After all, if they were going to steal my harvest, it was only fair that I returned the favor. And that was just the beginning. The festival had turned into a war scene. What used to be a square full of people laughing and feasting on organic and sustainable dishes was now a battlefield of burning mouths, watering eyes, and people running everywhere, as if they had been attacked by a swarm of invisible wasps. I've never seen so many people desperate for water at the same time. The HOA, which had always prided itself on keeping everything under control, was now in complete collapse. The organizers were running around trying to understand what was going on, but it was hard to reason with a bunch of well-dressed adults shouting and wagging their mouths as if they had just licked hell. And in the middle of it all, there was her, the woman who had the bright idea of declaring my farm a community supermarket without even bothering to ask permission. She was still red and sweating, trying to maintain her dignity as she wiped her brow and tried to say something other than a grunt of despair. I saw when she looked at the plate lying on the floor, saw the pieces of lettuce, tomato, and herbs, and realized that the problem was there. She looked around, her eyes desperately searching for someone to blame, and then her eyes met mine. I was standing there, calmly, with a glass of juice in my hand, watching everything like someone watching a relaxing sunset after a long day at work. She knew right away. The way her face turned from confusion to anger was a sight to behold. If she could, she would have set me on fire with her gaze. But instead, she started marching towards me, stumbling once because, apparently, her legs hadn't yet recovered from the impact of the ghost pepper. She stopped in front of me, took a deep breath, and, her voice a little hoarse, fired, "You did that on purpose." It was hard not to laugh. "I did what?" She gestured to the chaos around her. "You poisoned the food." "Now," I laughed. A low, amused laugh, because that accusation was so ridiculous that I didn't even need to defend myself. "You mean the vegetables you stole? The ones that were technically still mine? That's interesting. So now, not only do you take what isn't yours, but you also complain about the quality?" Her face turned even redder, and I honestly couldn't tell if it was from anger or because the pepper was still cooking her brain. That was sabotage. Sabotage? I just grew my vegetables as usual. If someone had the idea to take them without asking, I can't be held responsible for someone else's food choice. She opened her mouth to argue, but closed it again, probably because she knew there was no way she could win this conversation. The fact was simple. They had taken something that wasn't theirs, and now they were paying for it. Of course, people like her never accept defeat so easily. She gave me a look of pure hatred, and then turned to the other organizers who were still trying to deal with the desperate residents. In the midst of one of them gargling wine straight from the bottle, and another plunging his entire face into a bowl of ice, she shouted, "Call the police!" How interesting! Now that her mouth was like a furnace, suddenly the problem was serious enough to involve the law. I sat back in my seat, crossed my arms, and waited, because this one I wanted to see. The police arrived in a matter of minutes. Some neighbors probably called for help thinking someone was being attacked because the screams were still echoing around the square. I watched as the officers got out of the car and looked around, clearly trying to understand why there was a group of desperate adults drinking milk as if they were in the middle of a satanic ritual. 2 policemen came towards me, with the woman walking right behind, pointing at me as if she were handing over a dangerous criminal. It was him! He put something in the food. One of the policemen raised an eyebrow and looked at me. "Is that true?" I shrugged. "I didn't put anything in any food. I just looked after my crops, as I always do. If someone took my vegetables and decided to make a feast out of them, without even asking me, I really can't be blamed for the result." The policeman looked at her. "Is he saying that the vegetables were his?" She hesitated for a second. "They were on his farm, but did you ask permission to take them?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. I could almost see her brain squirming, trying to come up with an answer that wouldn't incriminate her. But the truth was obvious. The policemen looked at each other, and one of them sighed. "So you broke into his property and took the vegetables without permission, and now you're mad because they were spicier than you expected?" The silence that followed was the best thing I've ever heard. The woman opened her mouth to reply, but the policeman held up a hand. "Sir, do you want to file a complaint for trespassing and theft?" I saw her face lose color. It was as if all that reddish hue from the pepper had disappeared and been replaced by panic. Because now the situation had turned against her, I thought for a moment. I could drag this out for weeks, turn her life into a bureaucratic hell. But no, I wanted something much better. So I just smiled. "No, you don't have to. I think I've learned my lesson." The policeman nodded. "That's good, because technically, if he wanted to, he could sue you. That's a tip for the future." The officers left, and the woman stood there, looking at me as if she wanted to strangle me with her teeth. But there was nothing I could do. She had lost. And to complete my victory, I looked around and saw that, even though the festival had turned into a complete disaster, some people were laughing. Some neighbors who probably never liked the HOA very much now had a wonderful story to tell. And I knew that, after all, that woman would never be able to give another order without someone remembering the great ghost pepper tasting. And that, my friends, was worth far more than any lawsuit. After that day, silence overtook the neighborhood in a way I had never seen before. For years, the HOA ruled the roost as if they were kings of the area, deciding who could do what, who should change the color of the house, who should mow the lawn in a specific way, and of course, who should contribute to the good of the community. Only now, after the festival from hell, no one looked at them with the same respect. In the days that followed, I went out to tend to my farm and noticed how the neighbors avoided looking at me. Some would duck their heads as they passed, others would deliberately turn away as if they feared I might shove a pepper in their mouths out of nowhere. And the woman who tried to turn my harvest into a compulsory community event? That one seemed to have evaporated. The first rumors surfaced soon after the disaster. They said she was ill, that she needed to go away for a while, that she had taken ill and was still recovering. But I knew the truth. It wasn't illness at all. It was shame. She couldn't leave the house without hearing whispers. Look, the one that almost set the whole neighborhood on fire. I heard that even her dog got sick because he licked a piece of food. Did you see her face that day? She looked like she'd been possessed by the devil. And that wasn't all. For the first time since this HOA was created, some residents began to question the rules. After all, if they could just decide that my crop was theirs, what else were they doing without permission? One neighbor started asking where exactly the money from the HOA fees was going. Another wanted to know why events were always mandatory, but no one ever saw the financial records. Someone noticed that certain people never had to follow the neighborhood rules, while others were fined for leaving their garbage on the curb for 5 minutes too long. The trust they once had crumbled. And so it was that, less than a month after the festival debacle, the woman who thought she owned the neighborhood announced that she was stepping down as HOA president. They said it was a personal decision, that she wanted to spend more time with her family. But everyone knew the real reason. She no longer had any morals. If she tried to impose any new rules, someone would always raise their hand and ask, "Is this really compulsory? Or is it like the chili festival?" That was her downfall, and it was beautiful. But the best was yet to come. One fine day, I was in my pasture, checking the fence after a night of strong wind, when I saw a black car pull up at the entrance to my farm. And there she was, getting out of the driver's seat with a tense smile on her face and an envelope in her hand. I stopped what I was doing and waited. She walked up to me, standing at a safe distance, as if she feared I was holding a bucket of hot sauce to throw in her face. "Can we talk?" I crossed my arms, watching. "Hasn't this been resolved already?" She sniffled, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes, but I wanted to leave it to you." She held out the envelope and I took it, opening it carefully. Inside was a check for $5,000. I looked up at her, waiting for an explanation. I know we took your crop without permission, and I know it was a mistake, so I thought it only fair to compensate you for the loss. It was unbelievable." She finally admitted it. I could have said a lot. I could have rubbed everything that had happened in her face. I could have turned her down just to see the despair growing on her face. But instead, I just shrugged and put the check in my pocket. "Good to know you've learned something." She nodded awkwardly. "I also wanted to tell you that I'm moving." I couldn't hide my smile. "Oh, really?" "Yes, I've sold the house. The HOA has someone else in charge now. I think it's for the best." "Better for whom?" "It certainly was for me." She hesitated for a moment before saying goodbye and driving off. I watched the black car disappear down the road and allowed myself a moment to appreciate the victory, because that was the truth. I won. They tried to force me to give in. They tried to push their idiotic rules on me. They tried to turn my farm into an extension of their condominium. But they didn't succeed. The HOA still existed, of course, but now much weaker. The new leadership didn't have the same strength, because after what happened, no one trusted them as much as before. And me? Well, I went back to my routine. My chickens still clucked in the morning. My tractor still made noise before the sun came up, and my plantation was still growing, intact. The only difference? Now, every time someone mentioned the HOA's organic festival, people shuddered. And that stinging memory was going to last for a long, long time. Don't forget to comment on what you thought, and to subscribe to the channel for more.